Screen Junkies. Welcome. I am so excited to be joined today by Jordan Vogt-Roberts, director of Kong Skull Island.
Hi.
And American Ham, if you're a fan of Nick Offerman, as I am.
I'm glad you went with American Ham second. That's actually,
right?
That's unpredictable, yeah.
I like to mix it up. I also saw it on Netflix just the other week, and it's so damn good, dude.
Well, most of that is honestly a testament to Nick Offerman. Very little of that is me.
I'm going to give you the credit anyway.
Honestly, that is my favorite. I love title sequences and credit sequence. That might be my favorite credit sequence, because the footage is beautiful and it was so fun being up north with Nick. But also during my title, when it says directed by Jordan Vogt-Roberts, it's literally me. It's like a silhouette of me pissing at 1,000 frames a second, like on my own name.
Is that you pissing?
Yeah, there's just like a stream of piss.
That is you.
That's me. Yeah.
It's
so that's
really
my favorite credit
piss.
sequence. Great pee. Really had to work up to that one.
Well, I'm going to give you credit because Nick's not here, and that's what he gets.
Okay, well, he's gonna literally like break down the wall like the Kool-Aid man behind us with an axe.
I would have to retire after that because nothing would ever get better.
Wouldn't that be great if it kind of was like Nick Offerman was like the Candy Man, where if you said his name 3 times,
he just appears.
He would just like break down your wall with an axe behind you.
Yeah, and all he has is really great advice.
My name.
Hi there. Is there a project you're working on?
I know more than you.
All right.
He has the best advice. We have to get off Nick Offerman because we have other things to talk about, but he does legitimately have amazing advice. But let's talk about, I really think he does.
I think there's a lot to actually learn from that.
I do too.
From that special, particularly how he talks about like just simple things that we forget about, like the way he talks about like the mirror and a relationship to technology. Like he's the best. He honestly, like Kings of Summer was a movie that like is like, how do you be a man in 2017? And you just stand next to him and you're like, I'm such a boy.
I think how do you be an adult in 2017 is probably the biggest question. But you did a period movie where people still knew how to be adults in the 70s, I think, for the most part.
A little bit.
When did we stop being adults? I think around the 80s, probably.
Well, part of the reason why I was interested in the 70s beyond like aesthetically the genre mashup and the apocalypse now of it all, which everyone's talked about a bunch, was the split that happened in society as far as I was concerned between sort of our relationship between myth and like science and technology. And as soon as that split happened, which like was sort of happening in the 80s and then in the 90s, but like now we're like truly feeling the effects of it, where I don't think we've really like discussed what this is doing to us. But I think that with the advent of our phones and maps and that technology, like we've ceased being adults.
So that's really interesting. Let's talk about that thesis for a second. So you're saying that no longer having myths culturally is why we're no longer adults, because what?
Well, sort of. I think that for me, a big part of Kong was actually about sort of the loss of myth and what that's doing to us. Myth is how we've told stories for thousands and thousands of years. And as a byproduct, the very simple way you access that is just like remembering things. Remembering stories of the past, how you get to your house, how you what someone's phone number is, right? These things that you have to sort of remember, like in your own way, those are these mythic things. And when you remove that, when you suddenly have access to everything, the example that I always give, and I've given this before, but it's like when you and I were kids and we were debating whether Santa Claus was real,
right.
There were only so many ways to like truly know whether that was the case. And now, a kid on a playground can just type into their phone, does Santa Claus exist?
Yeah.
Like, then myth as a concept is destroyed. And I think that for some reason, our need to like group stories and tell stories and have these sort of communal sort of myths in the world, and just the idea of the unknown and things like I think about like the Malaysian Airlines flight. Very, very tragic situation. Right? But the reason that was such a big deal, I think, is because we live in a world where that happened and a bunch of people woke up and said, what do you mean a plane disappeared? A plane can't disappear. We have ways to track that. How can a plane just disappear? You know, and then suddenly it's gone and it's like, wait, this actually just vanished? And I think that like woke something up in people where they're like, wait, we don't know as much about the world as we thought we did. And I don't think we know a lot about the world in general, but I think that like by suddenly telling ourselves that we know all of these things, And by like eradicating myth, I actually think that's like done something really terrible to the human psyche. Where like now we're all just children.
That's really interesting because then this is not where I was expecting this conversation to go, but I'm going to roll with it. Because
Here we go, guys.
It's right in my happy place. But that's really interesting because to me, the interpretation then would be that because you don't have that experience as much maybe as children, you extend it into your adult life because our modern myths in a way are movies. I mean, they're currently probably mostly why we see the rise of superhero movies and things like that is because we are craving some kind of larger than life mythology. And that is a superficial way to get it.
Yeah, I think that with superhero movies, for me, I agree we need these myths, but also people don't care about movies anymore in the same way, which is like a really fascinating thing that's happening with the internet and YouTube and Instagram. But I think superheroes stem from this, like just the myth of like the lawman. I don't think there's something that specific about superheroes. I think like you went from like Westerns and then Clint Eastwood legitimately like made a handoff from Westerns to cop movies. And then we went from sort of like cop movies to superhero movies, but they all, I think, serve the same purpose in our society, which is the idea of like the enforcer, the lawman.
Intergalactic lawman.
Intergalactic lawman. Sometimes you got to be that guy. That's my next movie.
Which I'm pitching right now for you to direct.
Intergalactic lawman.
Intergalactic lawman. We were talking about this a little bit in terms of how much you were paying attention to the critical and box office response to Skull Island and how for you it became a little bit gratifying, right? Because the things that you had fought for were recognized.
I didn't know whether I was going to.
What did you fight for? What did you have to fight for in the movie?
Everything. I didn't know how I was going to respond. This is my first time making a movie of this scale. You make an indie, it gets reviewed by a handful of people. You read those reviews, it's your first movie, so you can't help the like glutton for punishment of being like, I need to read these reviews. Also, I like to know what people think, and I'm not just making things for me, I'm making things for other people because that's what made me want to be a filmmaker. So I had friends who had made movies like this, and they're like, I don't read reviews, I go on vacation. And then I had friends that are like, yeah, I fall into a neurotic hole and I read every review. So I didn't know where I was going to fall. We were in London, and I was jet lagged, and so I'd fallen asleep at like 6 p.m. We were doing press, and I woke up like 3 hours later with a flurry of text messages. And it was right when the iPhone, like the new one, when you like type congratulations or whatever,
and
like
then
it
there's
does
the thing, yeah.
You know, and so like my phone was just going crazy, and I just looked at it, and it was all these reviews or people, my friends, just being like, "Oh my God, this is amazing! Congratulations!" And I was like, I guess I'm gonna read these reviews because it was a Hollywood Reporter and Variety articles that were like super positive for a monster genre film. And so at that point I was like, okay, I guess these are like positive enough, so I'm not like, I don't feel that exposed. I'm gonna read these, and it was gratifying, because you're making a giant monster movie that's somehow being like critically accepted, which is amazing in itself. And then also there are those things, like I worked so hard on this movie to do things that I felt like I hadn't seen before, because that's what made me fall in love with movies. And I feel like most movies feel very derivative now, where like you can go to a trailer for a film and be like, I've seen that before.
There was a recent trailer that pretty much told the whole movie.
Well, or it tells you the whole movie, but then like things just are these like tropes, and they happen certain ways. And I was just so obsessed with like, okay, if we're gonna do something that it feels like it's a trope, like a guy sacrificing himself with grenades at the end of the movie or whatever, how do you then subvert that? How do you like sort of elevate beyond expectation? How do you like do something crazy when you're like, oh, I see where this is going, and then you completely pull the rug out from under you? And so there were just so many moments like that, or weird things that it was like, does he really need to be in a gas mask, like surrounded by green smoke, slicing birds? Like, can't he just be in the smoke, slicing birds? Does he need the gas mask? And then it's like, do we even need this thing where it's like a complete weird style moment, like where he's slicing birds in general? Do we need that beat?
Yeah.
You know, all these things that just, anytime I think you start thinking outside the box with some movies like this, sometimes people are like, anytime something's different or takes a risk, you know, I think that sometimes people can say, well, why do we need, should we do it that way? And luckily, like, I had great people who like ultimately sort of helped support this crazy, weird vision that I had. But the reviews were gratifying because they did call out all of those crazy moments. Just even simple things like Kong, like the idea that...
Spoilers for Kong Skull Island, by the way. Just
spoilers. even weird stuff like at the end, Brie Larson's in his hand, right? She's in his hand.
Yes, I want to talk about this.
And then the tongue comes out, wraps itself around the arm. The arm gets taken inside the belly of the creature, at which point he rips out all of the guts.
Yes.
To me, that was just a moment of like being like, okay, if we're gonna have this giant third act battle, how am I gonna see stuff I've never seen before?
So
right?
Go ahead.
And then it was like, oh, well, that's crazy. I've never seen that. But that was a beat that for a long time there was just a lot of discussion about it. It was like, can we do this? Is this like, because it's different? I've never seen that before, which is why I go to movies. But there were a lot of times where people were like, this is too crazy. Like, this is nuts. But like every review calling out that or the gas mask beat or just like any of those weird things that for 2.5 years you like really just slave over, that was the most gratifying.
So
that's a very long answer for the question.
No, that was awesome. I have a question about that. So he's holding her. I wasn't expecting this question either, but he's holding her in the hand, and I love that moment too. And my thing is like, is he so smart that he knew to wrap his wrist around the guts, or like, how does he actually get a hold of the guts and keep a hold of her?
Well, the way that this is exactly the reason people would ask this question is because. They're like, are people gonna get it? I don't know. Like, that's so crazy. But technically, when the tongue shoots out, you see it wrap
around his arm.
It wrapped around the arm, and he's pulling back.
Yeah.
And his arm, some people think that he punches inwards, but like really the creature like pulls his arm in.
Yeah.
So it's already sort of wrapped around.
Okay.
But like, I wanted to take that to the place where like. Like in my world, you would have seen scenes of her, like a shot of her like waking up and like through the cracks of his fingers, seeing like the inside of the guts. Yeah. So
he has a great relationship. So this is my interpretation of his relationship with her in this movie versus being sort of Kong is always in love with the damsel in distress. It felt more, which is kind of gross and weird biologically. It felt more like she was his pet. Which I thought was way more appropriate.
It's a reverse Pokemon.
She's his little Pokemon.
She's his Charmander. For me, the very first thing that I wanted to do with the movie was like throw out the damsel in distress thing and the Beauty and the Beast thing. Just 'cause it's like we've seen that a million times. So for me, that connection, because you still, there were also a lot of moments in the film that I wanted to have be these like visual or otherwise homages to the previous films, like even simple things like him caught up in the chains at the end. It's like, here's the iconography of him in chains, but not for the same reason. And that was a moment where it's like, okay, this is something that people love about Kong, but how do we do this without it being the Beauty and the Beast thing? I always envisioned my Kong as more of like this like lonely god, but to me that stuff's more about like basic humanity and actually like understanding, and there being this like this bridge of somehow these beings like have a core understanding, or there is a connection between them, but it's not based in romance, and it's not based in love, and it's not based in lust, certainly. And so to me, it is like actually about like how do like what is the humanity that relates them? What is the relationship between like a human and a god, or human and myth, essentially, and how those things are like intertwined. Like when he's looking away at the end, when he's walking away from him after the final battle, I remember like giving ILM the note of like, they were like, what's the emotion here? It's like, well, I wanted to look back and like almost have a sadness over the fact that like they could have gotten along, but it just wasn't meant to be. Like there's larger forces that like these things they're from different worlds. They're from different eras. And so like they could never fully be, but there is, even though one thing is like a 5-foot person and the other thing is a 100-foot tall ape, there is still something that binds us.
Well, to me, it was also like they came in to strike. First of all, I was 100% on Team Kong from right at the get, because that was such a great way to introduce him. It was so visceral and exciting, and you're right, you're with him immediately because they're attacking him. Why wouldn't he defend his island? But then she saves the water buffalo, so I understood why he would have more of a rapport with her. All of it felt very justified to me, but not this weird goddess on the mountaintop worshiping in love with a species that isn't yours, and by the way would kill her if that were ever to come to fruition.
I mean, there's some weird anatomy going on there for sure.
Let's talk about, speaking of anatomy, let's talk about how big Kong is, because that has always been that's a question among fans, right? Now we know how big he is, but how many conversations did you have to have about the size of Kong? Do you know how old he is? How old is that in human years? I feel like he's maybe 16 in human years.
Well, it's tricky because some of these questions I have my own answers to the universe in my head, and like one thing that I think is really interesting is, in my mind, all of the creatures don't have names. Very specifically because there's been no science teams there, and the way that the iwi, the villagers, work, like they see no reason to give names to these things, which is where the joke even comes from of like Marlowe, John C. Reilly's character, like making up a dumb name for this character. Calling it a skullcrawler.
Skullcrawlers,
like, I actually, for me, the first name of that creature was supposed to be, they were like, oh, we call it MacArthur. And because I think it's funny when people name their cat something human, when they're like, oh, that's my dog, Kevin. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, I'd love to see a monster that has a name like Kevin or something. So he's supposed to be called MacArthur, and then they'd be like, why? And then it came from like relationship of him saying like, oh, me and Gunpei called him MacArthur because he's like General MacArthur, where you can't stop him. So like it had reason to it. And so like then you find out that all of these, because of toys and things like that, all of these creatures have like names like Psycho Vulture and things like that. Where you're like, in my world, these things don't have names.
So the Skullcrawler is Kevin?
No, the Skullcrawler is the Skullcrawler because it's canon. He says it. But so you find out that there are these things larger than you. So I have my own answer on how old Kong is and things like that. But whether that's like canon, I don't know anymore. The size of him is also funny because there is a bit of, or at least at the beginning, there was like some skepticism in the like online nerd community.
Sure.
Of like, oh, they only made him this big so he could fight Godzilla.
He has to fight Godzilla.
And it was like, actually, one of the very first things that I wanted to do.
He does have to fight Godzilla, though.
Well, sure. But also, the reason that he was that big to me, beyond like the first things that I said was like, he needs to walk on 2 feet. He's a biped. We're going back to like 33 movie monster. But I was also like, I want him huge. I want him enormous. And this is before Kong Godzilla conversations. And I was like, I want him enormous because I want you or I to be able to look at this thing and have it tower over you. And like like the first synapse in your brain when it fires, not like the 10th, not the 11th, but like the first time, for your first reaction to say, that's a god. Not, that's a really big monkey. Or, wow, that gorilla is so big, but like I'm looking at a god. And so it's this thing of like, how big do you have to make it to like elicit that like huge response from you? Like to elicit a response from your brain that like humans wouldn't think, to go to that place. And so I was like, I want to make him enormous. And so it was funny because there was so much skepticism up front of like, oh, they're only making him that big for this reason or this reason. And I think when people watch the movie, I actually don't think that the size is something that you even really think about that much.
No, because I think you do feel that sense of awe.
Right.
And I think you would also need to do that to create that sense of awe, because if you're 1933 and you're seeing that, those are revolutionary effects at that time, right? So you're feeling that at that time. Now you got to go a step further for us to have that experience. And it was totally executed. He does, though, have to fight Godzilla. Do you have any interest in continuing on?
I think I'm done with giant monsters for a little bit.
No giant monsters?
I mean, not these. I'm really proud of this world, and I'm super proud of. I think that in general, like, and this is out there too, of the response being like, why do we need a new Kong movie? And that was my response. And I'm really proud of how weird this movie is, and I'm really proud of how much people embraced that stuff and like actually called out like how strange the movie is. And I wanted it to have a voice, and I'm so proud of what we did and how I think it is like a very non-traditional like blockbuster in 2017. And I'm so proud of like what Legendary and Warner Brothers and those guys allowed me to do and the collaboration that we had. But I definitely don't think I've got Kong versus Godzilla in me. You never say never, but I don't. I'm so proud of the Kong that we made and the vibe of him and the energy of him and the vibe of the creatures on that island and everything. But like, yeah, it would be tough for me right now.
And is it because some of the challenges around working on a feature of that size and with so many different needs in terms of a connected universe, this felt like a standalone because it's the reintroduction.
And that's something that I really do give Legendary and Warner Brothers a lot of credit on, is I was very loud and probably very annoying about saying like half these movies you watch it and like halfway through they have this like 15-minute like departure trying to set up a movie that comes out in 4 years, and like it's just such a bummer to me. I love the shared universes are so interesting and can be cool, and it's like kind of miraculous, sort of when you look at it, that these places have been able to do it. Because like we grew up in an era where like people couldn't do that. Shit.
Yeah, I'm 25. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
people couldn't do they couldn't pull off like if when we were kids someone said to you, okay, so Marvel's gonna have like 15 odd movies that are all gonna be connected, they're all gonna be like, you know, varying degrees of good or great or whatever you want to call them, you'd be like, no way. No way, you can't do that. Like, people can barely make one good superhero movie, much less a connected universe, you know? So it seemed unfathomable. And I was very loud about saying, like, you have to understand this is not just this franchise and this universe. We're playing with King Kong. King Kong is film history. Like, we owe it. There are a bunch of people who are going to show up to this movie who have no interest in Kong versus Godzilla, have never seen Godzilla, and Kong is film history. Like, it would be a disservice to it. And there's a ton of stuff in the movie that like sets up the worlds and merges them and whatever. But I am proud and very thankful to the studios that they sort of let us try and make something as self-contained as possible.
Yeah, and I think it's also being in that setting is a lot of freedom, because you don't have to follow the tropes of the original Kong movies, because you don't have to go off the island.
Right, but also, you know, my movie and Gareth's movie are also like tonally 100% different from each other.
Sure.
And I love Gareth, and I love the way he directed that film. But, you know, even for those like his movie is like this incredibly visual, like somber, you know, movie, and mine's is weird, absurdist comedy at times. And so for them to let me go and do that is like kind of crazy, but in a weird way, you can sort of understand how those worlds would actually merge.
Be honest, how much attention was paid to the criticism that there wasn't enough Godzilla in Godzilla? Because there was plenty of Kong in Kong.
To me, well, you know what's interesting is I will be honest. And what's interesting to me is I bet if you break down the amount of minutes that Kong is in Kong versus the amount of minutes that Godzilla is in Godzilla, yeah, we're definitely more, but I doubt it's that much more. It's also about the placement. Yeah. You know, for me, it wasn't just a criticism of Godzilla and saying, oh, there's not enough of him. It was a general sort of reflection on me rejecting the idea that monster movies have to be this like slow burn. Mm-hmm. And generally, if you look at most good genre, like less is generally more. Mm-hmm. You know, like you look at a Xenomorph, you look at any of that stuff, like the less you see of it, the scarier it is. But I was obsessed with like kind of just as with the whole movie saying like, how do we throw out expectations and reinvent genre tropes? And I was like, I want to show them in the first scene because I want Kong to be this thing that looms over everyone and looms over the island. And I was obsessed with Bong Joon-ho's The Host, which also like shows the creature like it's probably like 20 minutes in, 10 minutes in maybe. But then it becomes about how the presence of this creature is affecting this family, as opposed to like building up to like it's amazing every time you see the creature, but it's not about that. And it wasn't just Godzilla though. Like you had looked at the last Batman movie, there was all this stuff where people were like, he's in it for 10 minutes, you know. And it's like, well, if we're gonna make a Kong movie, like it has to have Kong in it. Yeah. So it wasn't a like direct reflection on any criticism on Godzilla. It was just me also saying like I think Gareth played that game beautifully. Like I think that slow burn that he does is incredible in that film. However, I didn't want to make that movie, you know.
I'm a fan of Godzilla, by the way, just on the record.
I think he directed the hell out of that movie.
I thought he did too. I defended it heavily. I have every defense. I actually thought he was really clever the way that he used the different iterations of Godzilla in a way. Totally. So let's talk about the tone you're talking about, your tone, which is a lot of it though is this interesting combination of being a comedy, an absurdist comedy, like you say, and kind of a commentary on war at the same time. How do you balance that?
Short answer is I don't know. The long answer is like, I mean, look, if anyone saw Kings of Summer or watched You're the Worst, I think that one thing I'm proud of is someone could be like, oh yeah, that feels like Jordan's sense of humor in this movie. I am just obsessed with tone, and I'm obsessed with playing with tone in film. And that's what I love about a lot of my favorite movies from the past. And studios now like really want to treat tone like it's this like one or the other. It's like it can be a drama or it can be a comedy. Like how can and there were a lot of conversations of people being like, John C. Reilly can't be that crazy. Are you kidding me? And like a lot of that's like him
stuck there. Why wouldn't he be that crazy?
Yeah, and a lot of that's like But what people don't realize is that if you do it properly, it actually makes it more grounded. And somehow it gives it more pathos. And like what I'm obsessed with is like the slalom in between things, where like you can use comedy and drama, and when you do them both properly, the comedy becomes funnier, the drama has more weight, and then when you slalom and weave them together, they become poignant. And that's what people forget, is like life is absurd. Life is a crazy series of absurd things, and life is not one tone. And so I'm obsessed with, I think like there's a book called, I want to say it's called Chic Ironic Bitterness, which is even more relevant now, but it's about this idea
that
of
is
like,
the most hipster title for a book I've ever heard.
But it's about this idea of like how like the Daily Show and the Colbert Report and the Onion more accurately report the news than actual news entities. And through absurdity and humor, people actually find truth. And I think that that's actually true in cinema. And like, I think that like the reason John C. Reilly's character, beyond John being like an incredible human being and actor, the reason that his character resonates the most, beyond having sort of this simple through line, is somehow he's the human beating heart of the film, and he's so full of like empathy and pathos, and that stems from these crazy things. You know, it stems from like him saying this stuff that like on the page should break the movie. You know, but instead it actually has the inverse effect, where like it actually grounds people. And there was so much online, there's so much chatter on Twitter of people being like, ugh, what movie is John C. Reilly? And he looks like he's going to ruin the movie for me. Blah, 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 blah. You know, like there was so much of it where people were just like, just on John C. Reilly's character. And I was like, you guys are going to watch this movie and he's going to be your favorite part. Like, and I, you know, I couldn't like, I tried to like not really engage with people like when the trailers were coming out, because they were like, I saw the first trailer and it had like a really serious like Apocalypse Now tone, and then I saw the second trailer and it just, I don't know, it just looks just like stupid and goofy. You know, it's Stephen Sommers, you know, in 1999, and it was like, fuck. You know, and it's just like, just see the movie. Like, and it's so hard. Like, I love all the trailers, and I think Warner Brothers killed it on that stuff, and it's just so hard pleasing people. But at a certain point, you just want to say, like, just see the movie. Yeah. Like, just go and watch it. Like, it will all make sense to you, I promise.
I do have a technical question, and then I want to talk a little bit about this, why there's that binary feeling about tone. But I do have a technical question about Brie Larson as a photographer, because there were moments that it felt to me, and I wasn't sure. It seemed like she was setting up the shot, but then she didn't take it.
Do you have a specific example?
Well, it's when I think there were times when she was trying to focus in on Kong, and I couldn't tell if she was just like you're saying, her synapses could kind of shorted out, like she was in shock, and she almost couldn't process what she was seeing.
Well, with that, it was like a weird mix of wanting her to be this person who, like, in the face of battle and things like that, is like still going to get the shot. Yeah. But then also
the reality of what that would do to you to see that.
But then it's also a fine line of like, you know, you're gonna have half the people being like, she didn't get the shot, and then half the people are gonna be like, why is she taking a shot in the middle of this action sequence? You know, and so.
People are bastards. That's what we're learning
love the
today.
Internet, though. No, the internet's great. I mean, it's a deep, dark place, but I mean, the biggest thing with the internet that's amazing is just watching. Like, if we can just find a way to have it be this beautiful thing where people have shared interests and can find like-minded people and people who make them feel at home and comfortable and loved, then awesome. But you know, when it becomes like, the scariest thing is like the faceless internet, like attacking you.
Yes. Have you had that?
I have had that, yeah.
Really? I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right.
No, I know how that is. It sucks.
Look, this is so not here nor there, but I'm perpetually obsessed with just the fact that, like, we live in 2017 and we haven't figured out, like, very basic thing. We're still, like, arguing whether people should be treated the same and, like, have basic human rights and, like, whether you want people to be happy and treated well. And, like, we're still somehow figuring that out. So, you know, shit happens.
Yeah. Well, it's awful, though. It still is. I know it is. It sucks. It's terrible. Let's get back to the movie, though, because that's fun to talk about. I want to talk about this idea, like you said, the studios have this binary idea of tone. And do you think that is, in a way, because of the feedback loop and the echo chamber of the internet? Like you just described why the studio would have that fear by talking about what the internet response to that was.
Well, I don't necessarily even think it's just studios, though, because I do think that a lot of people feel that way, too, where There are reviews out there that say, oh, the movie can't decide what it wants to be. Does it want to be this like kind of slapstick comedy, or does it want to be this like serious reflection on war? And my response would be, it's both. And I want it to be both. And where people would be like, oh, he just doesn't have like a good grasp on tone. And it's like, actually, this is exactly the tone that I want. Like, this is exactly the tone that I am interested in. And just because it doesn't fit into your standards of what tone should be, that doesn't mean that it doesn't work. And that doesn't mean that, like, I'm so aware of what this movie is, more so than anybody on the planet, and I love things like that. And so that's what's interesting to me is because a lot of reviews are like, oh yes, it is cool because it slaloms between this tone, and I love the fact that it's able to be like when you can go from a moment that's like super serious to like unexpectedly funny back to serious, all like within a couple seconds. And the comedy somehow like makes the drama heavier, yet it doesn't take away from it. Like, those moments are the best. And like, that's a lot of stuff that Marvel's figured out too, of that levity. But I like to push that absurdity even further. So I don't think it's just studios. I think that there are a lot of people on the planet that have been conditioned to saying, oh, I just want it to be this one thing. And to me, that loop is not that dissimilar from saying like, okay, we need original films, but then we make original films and people don't go support the original films. Well, it's a same weird loop where like we need to somehow break the cycle where people want new stuff, but then when there's new stuff, they won't support it. And so I think part of that's like conditioning where people like want a tone that's different, but then when the tone's different, they're like, I don't know. It made me feel weird. I feel weird.
Show us on the monkey where it makes you feel weird. I want to talk about, I think that people don't know how to support smaller films because there's an overwhelming amount of content to some degree. But I do think it's interesting how many opportunities there are currently for independent directors to then take on a much larger film. What do you think the benefits are? I mean, the benefits to you are pretty obvious. Your whole world is open up. I assume, and I hope. Are you getting lots of calls?
Yeah, things are good.
Good.
Things are very good, yes.
But for the film itself, do you think it's just that you still have that vision? You still have that fresh eye? You still are willing and have the energy to fight for what you want?
I think it's a lot of things. I think when you talk about like energy, that's actually that's a very simple one that I think a lot of people like look over. Making a movie like this is super hard. Making a movie in general is super hard. Making an indie is hard.
Making anything that makes sense is hard.
Yeah. Life is hard. Let's get out of the brass tacks here.
Just get out of here and get drunk.
Life is hard, guys. No, but like on this term or on this movie, I started using the word creative aggression a lot, and I just became obsessed with like what is creative aggression. And you realize that like a lot of these movies, some of them are bad because they hired guys who just are not good filmmakers, and then some of them are also just like people weren't willing to
fight.
Fight gives it a weirder connotation, but I will not say that. but to like really go to the mat. And like, and that's not even just like, 'cause fighting is wrong because it's not just about like, I'm arguing with you on this thing, but also just the amount of, I deleted important childhood memories to like make room for giant monkeys and new creatures in my life, And so like, it's this thing where it's also like, okay, we're going to do this beat. So how do we make this interesting? I've seen this before. How do you reinvent it? How do you do something? And like, just the amount of creative energy that you have to put forward to be like, to try and solve those problems. That's a lot, And so the creative, just like the energy part is really big. And I think, so younger guys are getting hired for a multitude of reasons that I actually think is very complex. One of which, the easiest way to look at it and the most like dark is studios want to control these guys. There are elements of that can be true, and I know guys that's happened to. And there are elements of that's completely untrue at times. There certainly is an element where they can, when push comes to shove, if they needed to, but you try and work with people that respect you and you respect. The other element is you're cheaper, whatever. That's all like very kind of surface level stuff. The goal would be you're hiring these younger guys because they'll break their back for that energy to try and do something. Because also, like, a really big director now, why would they take on this movie?
They wouldn't.
Right. And then, and studios are also smart enough now generally to be like, well, then that leaves you the journeyman.
Yeah.
And so, let's say you kind of, like, why would you hire that guy?
Yeah.
So then you got to hire the guy who's like a little bit more of a risk, but willing to break his back for something that's good. And then we've seen examples of that I think have turned out like great. We've seen examples of that have turned out
Do you want to be specific?
Yeah, that's gonna make me a lot of friends.
I'm kidding.
A lot of friends. I think Gareth is an example of someone who like turned out great. You know, the example of there's plenty of guys that like it didn't work out for, and that I think like I actually think Josh Trank got. I think he got tarred and feathered, and that dude is way more talented than a lot of people. Like, people will wake up to him in a couple of years, like once he makes something new. But like, you know, he took on the brunt of that, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
And people also like you just become a punching bag, and people forget that there's like a living human being behind that.
Yeah, he really did get beat up. I think in the online culture, talking about the online culture, he took up.
Well, he put himself out there by putting the tweet out there, you know, and that's its own thing. But like, you know, it's so look. Regardless, there's good examples, there's bad examples, and then I think there's like entirely middle of the road examples of people I will not bring up, so don't ask. And I don't know whether this trend continues or what, but I think that people need to be really careful, because I think we live in an age where to be a good director now is not like being a good director 30 years ago. Like, you think about the complexities of making these movies now, when like you didn't have previs and you didn't have the internet and you didn't have all this stuff. Like, to make these movies back in the day would be that much harder. And so like, I'm someone who's super involved. I go and I get like my hands dirty with every department, and I'm there like creating the previs and setting that stuff up, and like, and just working like every day reviewing these takes from ILM, and like constantly kicking them back and being like, let's change this, let's do this. But it's very easy, I think, for a studio then to bring on guys and to treat it like it's a TV show. Like, to treat it like they're the showrunner,
right?
And then you have these directors coming in where it's like, yeah, like we'll handle the design stuff because it fits in our world, and yeah, we'll, you know, let us handle the previs and let the second unit do this stuff. And it's like, you know, I'm just someone who's super hands-on, so I was like, well, that's not how this is going to work. But I think that it's amazing that we're hiring these younger guys, giving these guys voices, and it should be girls. I mean, I use guys universally, but you're speaking accurately. Well, yeah, smart. Yeah. I mean, look, that will change as everything changes. It will. But sure. Like, you're like, I'll believe it when I see it. But hiring these younger people, it's amazing giving these people like who have this creative aggression of voice, but very quickly that can turn into like the sausage factory of like, you're a traffic cop and you're here to do these things. And so we just need to be careful with it.
A lot of people think that is more the Marvel model of functioning like a TV show, and Kevin Feige is the showrunner. Who knows? Who knows? It's all speculation.
Who knows?
I do remember, I figure when people are watching these, it's because, especially with directors, who are my favorite people to
watching
talk
these
to,
as in
like director interviews, it's because they have either an interest in filmmaking or they themselves want to be a director a lot of the times, and the film. But I always want to hear sort of the pragmatic advice. I remember when I was in film school, we brought different directors in every week. And the one piece of advice that I remember was the advice on how I think is applicable to life, to deal with notes from a studio. This was somebody who had worked in television as well. And he said, if you get 11 notes and 10 are really stupid, take the one that's decent, apply it, and then come back and say, oh my God, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my God, you saved our lives with that note because it affected this and this and this and this. And you pour it on so thick that they forget about the 10 you didn't do. Do you have a pragmatic piece of advice similar to that for how to kind of work with a studio?
Well, I actually don't think that that example is actually true. There are some examples, like I always heard this.
That was Martin Scorsese. I'm just kidding.
Look, there are some examples in which, like I always heard the story that I heard is Hedwig and the Angry Inch. They came back and they said, we just want this movie to be more triumphant. We want it to end more triumphant.
It's so weird.
Yeah, which is also like a kind of a vague thing. And so the dude went away and rewrote for like 3 months. And this is the story that I heard from someone very close to him. And he comes back after 3 months and basically turns in the same draft. And then at the very end of it, like before the draft said like Hedwig walks away, end of script. And then the draft that they turned in said Hedwig walks away triumphantly, end of script. And they're like, you solved it. It's so much more triumphant now. And so look, you hear stories like that. you hear stories like that where that's the case. But honestly, I find that like if you like baseline ignore people's notes, like that will not go well. There are times when you could be like, oh yeah, this is an amazing thing. And yes, like you just need to double down and defend the things you believe. But also in situations like that, you just learn to defend. Some ideas are so stupid that they will kill themselves by themselves. And so normally as an indie director, you're out there being like, I'm the goalie. I need to prevent everything from going in this net that I don't want in this net. And so you put so much energy into being like, just trying to like grab all these things. And on a movie this big, you have to learn to just like sort of be zen at times and be like, you know what? I'm not even going to fight this idea right now because it's going to kill itself. And all that's going to happen if I fight this is they're going to think I'm digging in on this one thing, and then it's going to become a thing. And you just learn this process of like, as painful as it is, because you're trained to be like, I need to like shoot everything down. Not shoot everything down, but like shoot everything that's coming at you, right? Or that you don't like. If you figure out what you need to protect, and eventually you just learn to like be zen about it. But to me, the advice that I really give is less about dealing with a studio, more just generally, which is like, I think you like going into this movie. Like if you asked a lot of my friends, I was like, I don't want to go make, there are blockbusters that have come out recently that have made a lot of money, that I think are incredibly safe. And there's a lot of them that like are just fine. I think there's a lot of fine movies out there that are making a lot of money because people's standards are like that low now. And it's true. And so it's like, I would rather go and fail really boldly and bravely, because to take risks, you can either do something new or you can fail. And that's why a lot of these movies become so difficult, is because you spend a lot of money and you get closer and closer to be like, fuck, we're taking all these risks. Like, what if this doesn't work? What if this tone doesn't work? What if whatever? And I just think fundamentally, like as an artist, as a filmmaker, as whatever, whether you're dealing with a studio or anyone, like I think in life, people now forget about vulnerability and just like being vulnerable as a human. And consistently, like when you get hurt, when you get beat up, people want to close up. And instead, like, I think you just have to keep putting yourself out there, as painful as that is, and continuing to have like honest conversations with the second you try, like with the studio, the second you try and start like doing the chess game and like trying to move the pieces around, like, yeah, you know, you can try and play that game, but like, do not forget those are also like smart people. And like, they will not take kindly to feeling like you're trying to outmaneuver them. You know, like that's not going to work out well. And so, because like, and there were times that like you go in and you're like, I got that. I'm good at politics. You can move these around. And like the more you can have like an open dialogue and be honest, be like, I hate that idea. You know what I mean? Like, that's stupid. And here's why this is stupid. Or they'd be like, Jordan, love you, but this is one of the, because everyone has stupid ideas, you know, everybody. And it's like, this is not going to work. And like, the more you can just be open with each other, I think the better off you are. And I just think you have to, instead of putting up your walls then because you've been hurt, which is what people do in life. Like, they're like, oh, my girlfriend hurt me and now I don't, you know, I don't let people in anymore. I have high walls. And then it's like, no, we're human. Like, we have to just be vulnerable. So,
well, I think that's great advice. These guys are going to kill me. I have to ask you about Metal Gear Solid, though. I just have to say this. Movies are boring a lot of the times now. They are.
We're back
in the time of a studio where everything's too perfect. And I miss the 70s where you got some weird.
Not just the 70s, it's also the early 80s. Like, people want to forget. If you go back and watch most of your favorite films from that era, like, things are weird. And I agree.
So weird.
I just view it like sometimes people want to treat movies like these spheres that they can just extend all over the world. And they're like, yeah, but if there's no rough edges to them, then everyone can enjoy them. Yeah. And what I think people fundamentally forget is the rough edges of things are what made you remember something.
Yeah.
You know, like that's the stuff that you really took, like, you know, and most of the scenes in movies that are your favorite scenes, I promise you, if you go and read about those films, that scene was probably the thing that, like, wasn't planned, was totally made up on the day. Studio wanted to cut, you know, said, get rid of that scene. You know, because they want to act like, well, is it moving the story forward? Is it doing this? Like, what is it serving? And you forget, like, that texture, those like quiet moments, the things that actually don't need to be there are why people love films. And somehow we're in this weird space where all of, like, there's actually a ton of stuff in Kong that I'm so happy is in the movie, that like John C. Reilly and those guys are, like, working on that boat for way too long, telling jokes in that scene. You know, like, for like, that's not moving the plot forward at all. You know, it's just like texture of the world. And there's so many weird things like that I love that don't need to be in the movie. And I just think people forget that, like, those things, the things that are the most expendable, or at least in the way that I am as a filmmaker, the things that are most important to me are, honestly, I think the things that most people would look at and be like, that's the easiest thing to cut. Cut that out, cut that montage out, cut those 3 shots out. What is that doing? Like, you know, and I just think that we forget that all those movies that you're talking about, the 70s or whatever, like, those are the things you remember.
Sure. End of the Graduate.
Yeah.
So talk to me. Is that what's up next? Are you going to go for Metal Gear Solid? Do you have other things now? Has your world changed so much that you may be doing something entirely different?
No. I mean, my world has changed, I guess. Metal Gear is so important to me. It's something that I grew up on and love very, very dearly. It's something that, like, I love video games as like an art form, as a medium, as a language. And, like, there are times when I'm actually more fascinated by, like, storytelling in games and the experience than I'm in movies. I think Journey for the PS3 is probably, like, my favorite piece of media in general in the last decade. So Metal Gear is something that I'm super protective of and fought very hard for. And, like, I got Metal Gear before Kong, and when I got it, it was like this crazy chase where they were like, dude, there's no way, like, they're not gonna give. And I went in and, like, made this book that was, like, breaking down, just like this Bible of, like, here's what Metal Gear is, here's how you make this movie, here's every possible way to go wrong, here's what it is. Just because Kojima's voice is so, like, you talk about things that are, like, easily cut or easily sort of, like, misinterpreted, and, like, what makes Metal Gear is the easiest stuff to misinterpret.
Like, you know?
What? Well, just the idea that these characters are these walking, like, ideologies. You know, and it's like a talky thing, and they're walking, talking philosophies. And then to understand that, like, yes, I'm very proud, and some people have said this, but, like, Kong actually has sort of a Metal Gear tone at times where, like, it's super serious and super stylized and very, you know, this Japanese interpretation of Western culture. But then don't forget, it breaks the fourth wall, and it's goofy and it's strange and it's self-referential, and so the things that sort of build that universe, like, on one hand you have this visceral gameplay of saying, like, every step you take, you're going deeper and deeper into the belly of this beast, and you're getting further and further away from safety. And so the quiet tension, like, you know, one of the only movies that's even, like, approached that kind of quiet tension is, like, the beginning of Drive, when, like, you know, that sequence where they're just driving around downtown LA. Like, quiet tension is not something you see a lot. Or, like, another great scene that I think is, like, that I talk about when talking about Metal Gear is, like, No Country for Old Men, when Anton Chigurh's on the other side of the door when he's in the hotel, and, like, he's unscrewing the light bulb. You're just, like, you're silent and just full of dread. And then, so you've got that emotion, and then you've got the panic of what happens when you are caught, and, like, just the wah, and then, like, the way the alarm's going off, and what it makes you feel when you're running around. And so capturing, like, translating those feelings from the game into cinema is super interesting, but then you can't separate Kojima's voice. You cannot make that series without like really understanding how odd it is and beautifully odd. Like it's a masterwork of media as far as I'm concerned. And so I now know how time consuming and difficult and yet rewarding making a studio film can be. And so I'm going to be very cautious about what I do next in that world, because I want to go do some TV stuff and I want to go do some pilots and I want to go live for a little bit and I want to go probably make an indie. But I can promise you, like, of all of these sort of studio things, there's not a franchise on the planet. There's a couple books that I love, like The Star Is My Destination, things like that. But in terms of like knowing, in terms of being able to wake up tomorrow and say, yes, I will devote 2 years of my life or 2.5 years of my life to this. Yes, I will be able to like fully immerse myself, knowing what you're fighting for. Like, what are you falling on the sword for? Like, what are you, because these things take so much from you, you know? And so like, can you wake up every single day knowing why you're doing it? And like, I can't think of anything on the planet that I would be more willing to like, sacrifice years of my life and development to try and make something that I believe in than Metal Gear.
So is that actively in development, or are you?
Yeah, we're writing. There's a script that exists that is being tweaked and changed, and because it's complicated. Like it's so easy to try and make Metal Gear into something that it's not. It is not G.I. Joe. It is not Mission Impossible. It is not any of these things. And so, getting these scripts right is really difficult. And I've got a great sort of team of producers that I'm working with on that. But yeah, we're like actively, we're in it. We're trying to like figure it out. And now it's like, well, we can't make. I'm not going to make the bad version of Metal Gear. So it's like no, we're not taking that script and we're not making that right now. No, we're not. It's like we need to. I just, there's no franchise to me that like is trickier and yet more rewarding to get right. So yeah, we're in it, but it's gonna be a while still.
Do you have kind of a dream cast and dream snake in mind? Just even while you're writing. Does that help you?
Not on a movie like that, because those characters are already so well defined. And the other tricky thing about Metal Gear that actually makes it even more complicated than a comic, where like with X-Men, with Batman, you have like decades of things to pull from and like decades of different stories, some of which are contained within one universe, some of which are one-offs, some of which are reboots. Metal Gear is this weird thing that spans so much time and has existed over decades, but it tells one unified story as of right now. And so that you have to be even more calculated in how you simultaneously translate it to a screen, make it accessible to a general audience, have the fanboys feel like, yeah, that's my Metal Gear, and you make the things that are weird about it that the fanboys need, that the people who like Metal Gear mean something to, that they're like, I love that this stuff's in the movie, and then you make that the stuff that actually like sells the general audience, that they're like, oh, I've never seen that before. That's cool. That's different. So getting into casting stuff is complicated. Also because I'd like to think that there's a version of this movie that can be made for a good price to do like the cooler, like weirder version of it. And so, you don't want to blow $20 million on someone for Snake or Ocelot.
So you would rather have, that's interesting. Don't you need that person to get the money?
It depends what it is. I mean, look, you never really know how those things work out, but like Metal Gear is just this wonderful universe layered with great people. So
maybe not.
So it's an incredible ensemble. So you have so many people you can choose from. But look, that's its thing that like will happen down the line of like whether we need X movie star to get this made or what. We'll see.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next. If do an indie in between or a pilot in between, go make us a Fargo. The best stuff is on TV, I'm telling you.
TV is killing it right now.
TV is killing it. The best movies are on TV a lot of the time.
I haven't seen Fargo yet.
Dude.
The other thing that I'm obsessed with but Fargo is interesting to me, the movie, because do you know how long Fargo is?
Do you want me to guess the runtime? Okay. 2 hours and 16 minutes.
Okay.
I don't know.
No. Because that's how full that movie makes you feel, right? That you're like, I get this much from the universe, like, so to give me this much in 2 hours and 16 minutes.
It's an hour and a half.
It's 95 minutes.
It's my favorite runtime.
95 minutes.
That is my favorite runtime. Movies don't need to be longer than that.
They don't need to be that crazy. Like all these things are this like that. That's why with Kong it was so important. Like I want to make something like fast that moves and like, it's crazy to me how like bloated these movies have gotten. Some of it's
especially
awesome.
Comedies.
Yeah. So,
Go do a comedy.
I might, if I do it, honestly, I kind of want to like, I want to take John C. Reilly and like Nick Offerman and these guys and like go do what we started messing around with in Kings of Summer, which was like, that movie was me being like, I want to make a really dumb Terrence Malick movie. Like, how do you do something that's like ethereal and lyrical and like a tone poem, and then have Nick Offerman telling dick jokes.
Yes.
And so I want to like kind of go with those guys and go and shoot something weird like that.
Well, Tulane, Magic Mike. Have you seen Magic Mike?
I haven't seen Magic Mike.
Magic Mike is Soderbergh's two-lane blacktop of male stripper movies. So if you can do like the two-lane blacktop of Nick Offerman dick jokes, I would be so on board for that.
Beautiful. All right, let me put it in consideration along with Intergalactic Man. What was the name of it?
Intergalactic Cop Man. I think it was.
Yeah.
Do it. If you haven't seen Kong, I don't know why you've been watching this conversation because we just basically you f***ed up so hard.
Intergalactic Cop Man is coming for you.
Coming for you to put the smack down. See Kong. God, it's good monkey business, man.
Good old monkey business.
It's really good monkey business. It's great monster business, and that's no
I
small
just wanted
feat.
to make it look. For me, the biggest thing was also like just people when they would walk out of it and they'd be like, "Oh, a monster movie that has monsters in it." You
and
know,
it's
or
awesome.
like or like just be like, "I felt like I was 12 again," or people being like, "That's the movie I wanted to see when I was 15." It's like, like that makes me so happy.
Yeah.
So
great monster fights. He's the most important character for me. He was the most important character, which I think is really important.
How skeptical were you of the movie beforehand?
Before I went to see it, I was hopeful, to be honest with you, because I like you and I like your work.
But was it a slow? Journey? Like when it from announcement to like a Comic-Con trailer to second trailer that sort of revealed John? Like I want to know what your journey was.
What was my journey?
What was your trajectory?
This is being turned around on me.
Dun, dun, dun.
So I like giant monsters and I like giant monster fights. So I'm already kind of an easy audience, just to be clear.
But also, people now know that the movie like actually is more in vein with like kaiju films.
Yeah.
But when you just hear Kong, you don't necessarily think giant monsters always.
You don't, but I actually, so when they announced Skull Island at that Comic-Con, I was just incredibly excited. But I wondered if it was going to be, again, just another remake like Peter Jackson did. And I was like, oh, I don't really need that movie again. Like, I don't need to see the Empire State Building climbed again. But then as we moved forward and it was not set in present day, and if it was going to be part of that universe, it was clear that we weren't going to get off the island. Otherwise, we would have known about this giant monster, right? And we didn't by the time Godzilla rolled around. So they're not leaving the island.
Right.
Then you have to figure, well, what's Kong going to do on this island? He's got to fight monsters, right? You asked
detective work.
You asked
this is very,
for the trajectory.
I'm happy to know. We're getting all the detective work.
So he's gonna fight monsters, and then you start to see it's gorgeous, right? So like those first few trailers come out, and they're beautiful, like just so. It is reminiscent of Apocalypse Now, and everybody's talked about it, but those are beautiful frames.
That was my pitch.
Yeah. Like those are beautiful frames. So those were my thoughts: the helicopters and the landscapes and the sunsets, but also just the violent storm. All of that is really beautiful. So that's what I was thinking. Like, oh, it's a gorgeous movie. It's a big monster. I loved the look of Kong. From what we saw, I did like how big he was and how imposing that was and how we need that now in order to buy into the whole story. And then John C. Reilly came, and I will admit, I was one of the people that was like, I'm not sure what the tone is. I don't think I understand. And he was absolutely my favorite part, besides Kong. Kong was my favorite part of the movie, which I think is important.
Yeah, for sure.
And I really liked the other monsters. I love that spider monster.
Oh, thanks.
And the little log one that was nice.
The stick creature, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Which is why I just turned
was
into
nice.
a 5-year-old baby voice. He was really cute.
That was a lot of work. That was another thing where it's like, we went through thousands of designs of like, and the movie, when you saw that teaser, that movie was set in 1917. The script that I got was 1917. And then I came in and was like, let's do the 70s and let's do Apocalypse Now and let's do this. Yeah. When they showed that teaser at Comic-Con, like they didn't have a director, but the script that they had was set in 1917. And I was like, I've seen this. I don't need like, I love the movies you guys make, Legendary, Warner Brothers. I'm not the guy for this movie. And I just feel like I've seen it before. And I was like, if you're going to make a Kong movie, like now, when audiences are smart, like it's got to be weird and different. And it's like, why does it have a reason for being? And that's when, like, you talk about the myth stuff earlier and just like the aesthetic mashup of it was like me going away for the weekend and sort of saying, what Kong movie would I make? And that's when like Apocalypse Now and Choppers and Napalm and Hendrix and like the idea of like a Vietnam like Harryhausen creature feature mixed with like that era. I was like, oh, I'll make that. I've never seen that movie before. Like I'll make the hell out of that. But that's not what it was originally. And like with those creatures, it was like, I've talked about the Miyazaki influence and stuff like that, but it was just like for me also as a nerd, it's like I get to make my own monsters. So like they can't feel like things I've seen before. And so it was so much work creating weird stick creatures or like majestic water buffaloes or whatever to have them feel like, oh, that's cool. That's weird. That's different. But those were all, those are long processes to get there.
Yeah, and it's super successful. I like monsters, like I said, and they really fill out that world. And it's not just the default of like it's Kong and then a dinosaur,
right?
But it's Kong and all of these really unique creatures that exist on that island. I thought they looked great.
Thank you.
I really like the monsters a lot. So
John C. Reilly came out and you were like, I don't know about this tone in the trailer.
I don't know if I was that skeptical, but yeah, I didn't know.
Right. Okay. But you were gonna go. You were not one of the people that had to be like extra sold.
No, but I always want movies to be good.
Sure.
It's my job to watch movies.
Right.
I've talked about this a lot here, but I went into a lot of debt to go to film school.
Right.
I love movies and I always want them to be good. And I like you, if at least take a swing, do something interesting, be weird. And I like monsters. So there were great monster fights. I liked the changes. I'm doing my review here. I loved Kong's relationship with her because it made more sense to me than in previous iterations. Yeah, good monkey business, man. And it's beautiful.
So I wanted it to be beautiful.
Yeah.
I grew up on like anime and all that stuff has like keyframes that you like can print out. These movies don't. It's just all these movies look the same now. It's really weird. It's all like, I just feel like I'm watching a bunch of previs sequences and then it cuts into like TV-esque coverage and then it goes back to like previous sequences that aren't even that interesting the way they're shot.
Go see Kong if you haven't seen Kong. You've seen Kong, go see it again. Go see it with this in mind. Play it underneath because I think we've talked as long as the movie.
Yeah, just
this will be your
watch this on your iPhone and annoy the person in the theater next to you.
Exactly. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Click here for more awesome Screen Junkies news and click the logo to subscribe.